It's Wednesday, May 8th. Got Chapo coming at you a little early today. And Felix and I are joined today by returning favorite, David Roth. David, welcome.
Hey, how are you?
In just a little bit, we'll be breaking down all of the money lines, the parlays, all the hot betting action that you can get down with promo code Chapo at any of your favorite gambling websites. If you're into the playoffs this year, you're going to want to make some money, and we're going to be giving you the can't miss Mortal Lock picks.
I was going to say,
upcoming...
you got to say can't miss. It's the only way that people will know that these picks are guaranteed to hit.
No, we will be discussing the phenomenon of sports gambling and its rapid proliferation in American culture with David. But before we get into that, I have a little bit of breaking news to discuss. This is of real importance. And I think, honestly, if the current state of affairs was not so fucked up, this would be like a week-long story on Twitter, but I'm just going to get into it. RFK Jr. has brain worms. Or rather, sorry, need to issue a correction. RFK Jr. has brain worm.
Yep. Or I guess you would say had brain worm. Because I think the story was that he had it and then it just died. And now it's there.
Yeah, it could not withstand like an hour of living in RFK's mind.
Yep. I think that would be true. Most organisms are not evolved enough to handle that.
He took one bite and was like, wait, what the fuck? But the Bluetooth like gives you leukemia? What?
Yeah, the brain worm sadly turned into a diamond instantly the moment that RFK Jr. started thinking about the germ theory of disease. The pressure bearing down on it was so incredible.
That worm crawled up his nose with like a fucking lobster bib tied on his neck. It was getting ready to just go to town. No, you're trapped in here with me, buddy. Nobody's getting out of my brain alive. But this is from the New York Times here. It says, in 2010, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was experiencing memory loss and mental fogginess so severe that a friend grew concerned he might have a brain tumor. Mr. Kennedy said he consulted several of the country's top neurologists, many of whom had either treated or spoken to his uncle, Senator Edward M. Kennedy, before his death the previous year of brain cancer. Several doctors noticed a dark spot on the younger Mr. Kennedy's brain scans and concluded that he had a tumor, he said in 2012 deposition reviewed by the New York Times. Mr. Kennedy was immediately scheduled for a procedure at Duke University Medical Center by the same surgeon who had operated on his uncle, he said. While packing for the trip, he said he received a call from a doctor at New York Presbyterian Hospital who had a different opinion. Mr. Kennedy, he believed, had a dead parasite in his head. The doctor believed that the abnormality seen on his scans was caused by a worm that got into my brain and ate a portion of it and then died, Mr. Kennedy said in the deposition. Now an independent presidential candidate, the 70-year-old Mr. Kennedy has portrayed his athleticism and relative youth as an advantage over the two oldest people to ever seek the White House, President Biden, 81, and former President Donald J. Trump, 77. Mr. Kennedy had secured a place on the ballots in Utah, Michigan, and Hawaii, his campaign says, California and Delaware. His intensive efforts to gain access in more states could put him in a position to tip the election. I got to say, this Kennedy family does not have a good record when it comes to brains.
No.
They are really...
This one has that feeling, too, of it being like he was displaying erratic and irresponsible behavior, notable even in a Kennedy. Like, it feels like one of those things, like, how much like RFK Jr. do you have to be acting before someone's like, we got to check and see if there's a worm in there, just in case.
I mean, I'm glad this came out in like a deposition that the New York Times uncovered, because for a second there when I saw this story, I was just thinking, this is what RFK Jr. is saying on the campaign trail.
Oh yeah,
he's like, everybody, I thought I had a brain tumor. It turned out it was only a worm that ate part of my brain and then died.
I think that's like the crowd work portion of everything that he does. Like where he just gets up there and he's like, how many of y'all got a worm in you that you can't explain how it got there? And like all the hands in the room go up and he's kind of like, I've had a similar experience. Everybody's, like, I think that's like his demo. Like certainly all this stuff in the article about like diagnosing yourself with a worm is like, I think that's like 100% approval rating among Kennedy voters as a thing to do. And then I feel like also there's the other aspect in there where he got his blood spun, which is another like really popular thing to try to get, because he like, this was for the, I don't want to get ahead of it. There's another poisoning aspect in the story that I'll let you get to.
For decades, Mr. Kennedy suffered from atrial fibrillation, a common heartbeat abnormality that increases the risk of stroke or heart failure. He has been hospitalized at least 4 times for episodes, although in an interview with The Times this winter, he said he had not had an incident in more than a decade and believed the condition had disappeared. About the time
Does
he learned of
anything in this guy's body like work right? Like it's like problem after problem. It's so insane. It's like it's like if how they made Cadillacs before the bailout. It's really fucked up. And like it all goes back to his horrible voice, which is, I think, his biggest problem. And like I don't really believe in Mandela effect for the most part, but I feel like there was a minor one with RFK and all his medical problems. He was, before he was known for being the vaccine guy, he was like a big environmental guy. And I always made the assumption like, oh, someone like poisoned him as a kid, like, oh, he was in the Bhopal disaster somehow. And that's why he's all fucked up.
He summered at 3 Mile Island.
Yeah, I thought, something like that. And I thought, like, that's why no one's talking about all this guy's maladies. But it turns out he just got it from, like, sharing needles and, like, sticking his head in punji traps for no reason. Just all unforced human error.
Well, going on with his medical problems, it says here, about the same time he learned of the parasite, he said, he was also diagnosed with mercury poisoning, most likely from ingesting too much fish containing the dangerous heavy metal, which can cause serious neurological issues. I have cognitive problems, clearly, he said in the 2012 deposition. I have short-term memory loss. I have longer-term memory loss that affects me. In the interview with The Times, he said he had recovered from the memory loss and fogginess and had no after effects from the parasite, which he said had not required treatment. I mean, well, assumingly they took it out of his. Well, I guess it just died and sort of, I don't know, like he became part of his brain. Yeah.
With the power of his ideas. They're allies now. It's like he has like a Quado in there.
Turn off the vaccine, Quay. Yep. Open your mind to my parasite, to this worm. But yeah, no, it's unfortunately the brain worm being deceased couldn't endorse him in time to be joined on stage by his other big endorsement this week, Kevin Spacey.
Yeah.
The coveted Kevin Spacey endorsement. This is what we've all been waiting for.
The Spacey endorsement is so good too, because he's like, when everybody realized what I was like,
yes,
and all the crimes that I did, all the things that I did that no one should do, only one man stood with me, and I'm endorsing him today for president of these United States of America, which is just, that's how you do it. That's the Spacey method, but it is also like, yeah, that's about as good an endorsement as you're likely to get.
Yeah. It says here, the campaign declined to provide his medical records to the Times. Neither President Biden nor Mr. Trump has released medical records in this election cycle. However, the White House put out a 6-page health summary for President Biden in February. Mr. Trump released a 3-paragraph statement from his doctor in November. It's a nice 3-paragraph statement. And, I just love it. And the Times article is right. RFK Jr., like, his blood is like a thermometer, and he's got like big dig style holes in his brain, and he is absolutely the spryest of anyone running for president.
Yeah, there's
absolutely the best. Yeah.
In the story from the spokesperson for his campaign, where they asked about it, about like whether this would be an issue, and it's like one of the like most painful you do gotta hand it to him moments imaginable, because the person is just like, that's a ridiculous question given who else is in the race, and you're kind of like, I guess he does have some good ideas. The campaign does make some points.
But, like I said, I feel a little bit robbed by this story because obviously the state of the world is so appalling right now that, like, if this were just a regular presidential election, Robert Kennedy having a worm in his head would be like, I feel like we get a lot more juice out of that.
Having gotten mercury poisoning because he gave himself Jeremy Piven's disease. That's his claim in there.
Yes,
he ate so much tuna.
Yeah, well, like in the article I read, he said, I love tuna fish sandwiches. I couldn't get enough of them. And that's like, you're a Kennedy. You can't at least get like mercury poisoning from eating sushi.
Yep.
Tuna fish sandwiches. It's just such an idiotic way to catch such an idiotic ailment.
Yeah, like you should honestly die of mayo exposure before the mercury gets you if you're eating tuna fish salad, like tuna
Just
salad
your
at that
arteries.
volume.
Yeah, just your arteries will go before your brain for the
Sir,
mercury
your
gets
celery
you.
levels are way out of whack. Are you using the joy of cooking recipe?
I mean, sorry, just like one last graph here. It says like, I missed it. But basically, mercury poisoning and brain parasites can cause neurological impairment, but also sometimes people fully recover. I just like every time this shit comes up with Robert F. Kennedy Jr., I'm just like, can this guy like talk about something other than what I'm supposed to do with my body and health? You know what I mean? Like, could you just like, I don't know, maybe ratchet it. I mean, you gave yourself mercury poisoning from eating tuna fish, and you're getting mad about me about a fucking vaccine.
He also has pursued medical interventions with a level that, again, is like super high, even for the cohort that supports him. It's mentioned, I think, at the very end of the story, they note that he has like a titanium throat now in an attempt to remedy the whatever the name of the disorder is that Felix was talking about, where he only can talk in burps. That he got like some special treatment that he says has like made it a lot better. But it is the sort of thing where he's always like finding the one doctor that will do this surgery for you. Just a very risky way to live one's life.
Wolverine.
Yeah, right.
Like if he became president, he would be our version of that Chinese emperor who drank mercury to become immortal. That would be like a day one promise from him. He'd be like, I'm opening the alchemy department again.
But he would get there somehow by like just eating some unfashionable mid-century casserole made with canned tuna to get there.
Yeah, he would eat meat from one of those sharks that has like too much like lysine in it to the point that it's toxic for humans. He would eat like one of those Greenland sleeping sharks.
You know, if you're looking for a healthy source of protein, I cannot recommend highly enough an 800-year-old Greenland shark that was alive when Shakespeare was writing Hamlet. If you can get one of those, you know, put maybe a little cracker, a little spread. Oh, good stuff.
This
is
how
a good,
you actually
clean source of protein.
If you wanted to do an op to like take out Kennedy types, like people with like Aaron Rodgers disorder, like any of those guys, you would just be like, you got to eat. If you want to be alpha, you need to eat at the very top of the food chain.
You need to eat other alpha animals.
You need to eat the thing that eats every other thing if you want to become the thing. And then, that's when you're eating like whatever, a whale shark, and then instantly developing diseases that were eradicated in the 13th century.
Kennedy campaign on hiatus after candidate diagnosed with scurvy. He's being treated with a regimen of lime juice. Well, best of luck to both RFK and Kevin Spacey on the campaign. I'm hoping we get Kevin out on the campaign trail with him. You know, I want to see events with, you know, he's like, you might remember me from such films as Glengarry Glen Ross and The Usual Suspects, and a few other things I've done. But I'm here today to support the only candidate that stood with me when everyone else. Yeah, David, like you said, Kevin Spacey said, when the world turned on me, when the world turned their back on me because of the, you know, numerous rape allegations, Robert F. Kennedy was the only one who stood by me.
That's been a weird thing over the past 6 months. Like, why has Kevin Spacey become like a partisan issue? Like before this, like Tucker had him on and was like, do you think people should apologize to you now that you've killed all your accusers? He was like, yes.
Boeing is calling up Kevin Spacey asking, how did you do it, Kev?
I remember I think that's like a really good question. I think the first moment I had that thought where I was like, that everything is going to eventually break down in that sort of binary where like reactionaries are going to get behind someone that regular society has decided sucks, was watching the just like steroid hearings. There was a lot of them like 10, 15 years ago. And I remember Roger Clemens was being questioned. And at some point it became clear to me that the Democrats on the committee were kind of getting his ass. And then the Republicans were kind of like, could you sign this baseball for my son? His name is Tyler. and I remember being sort of surprised at the time because I was like, I thought that, you know, everybody that was sort of like united in dudgeon as a cultural moment of just like, don't do this, don't take steroids, it's bad for the game. But at some point it was just, if you show like a lizard-brained reactionary, like a rich person who is like in peril or is like exhibiting stress behavior, they will rush to defend that rich guy. Like just it's like an autonomic thing.
Well, it's got to be like a certain
fires.
kind. It's a certain kind of rich guy because like
Yeah.
Roger Clemens was a huge asshole his entire
Yes.
career and like a belligerent jerk to just about everyone in the way that sort of tickles the funny bone of reactionary sentiment.
Yeah.
So Roger Clemens, and you know what? Now you bring it up, I've had a thought of a similar thought over the last couple of days, and I think Drake is going to become a culture war totem, and I think we're already seeing Elon Musk follow Drake for the first time ever. He's like,
Yeah.
a guy accused of colonizing and pedophilia. Interesting.
I wonder if you might like to join this DM I'm in. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like
I just think that like now that like the Drake has become synonymous with grooming teenage girls, I think this sort of like Nick Fuentes alt-right is going to herald him as some sort of cultural champion because they're like, yeah, it's simply rational to want to marry a 15-year-old.
Yep. They're the most fecund. And I say that as someone who loves women and sex. Yeah, exactly.
Well, speaking of sports and the culture, David, we want to get you on because we're in a sports moment right now. We've got the NBA and NHL playoffs on, but we want to get you on to talk about sort of like this. If you watch sports on television now, if you want to enjoy the game, like first and foremost, you are currently being MK Ultra'd by like a series of the worst commercials ever devised by a human or non-human intelligence. Like it is really, really punishing. You got to be quick on the mute button to watch any of these games for sure.
It's
but the other thing that like sports culture in this country, at least is how it's covered in the media or the way people like interact with sports, has undergone like a real sea change over the last couple years as all but I think 12 states have now legalized sports gambling. There are 38 states in which sports gambling are legal. Texas and California being like the biggest states that are the outliers here. But like the point is, when it used to be like, David, as you remember, like growing up, like especially in baseball, the idea of that you would have like the games being sponsored by sports books, in light of the Pete Rose scandal, was like the most unthinkable thing imaginable. But we've now seen like a total blending of like the sports media, the sports leagues, and these like huge gambling conglomerates. And I'm just wondering, like, what is your perspective on someone who covers sports and watches sports? Like, what do you make of the like a whole the fire sale of like what's left of the threadbare integrity of these sporting leagues?
Yeah, I mean, it's not a good feeling, and not just because, as you pointed out, the general. I mean, I know that like it might be when you're talking about bad ads, you might be talking about the one where Chet Holmgren and Shea Gilgeous-Alexander sing what a pro wants.
And I'm thanking you for knowing exactly what a pro wants, what a pro needs. Whatever makes me happy sets me free.
That's a very bad
that
ad.
and the Wingstop ad.
Yes, but the other right, yes.
Every other ad is entreating you to gamble on the games that you're watching on TV.
Yes, and it's like a whole sort of type of ad with its own like sort of shitty vibe and energy to it, where it's just like Aaron Paul or Jamie Foxx like just eyeballing the camera and talking to you like you're the biggest asshole that ever lived. Like it's a very unpleasant experience.
Yeah.
But so like that, I mean, I guess in some ways, like I had very little optimism about the idea of like when you open the door to gambling in sports, like it took about the amount of time that you might imagine it would take for there to be major scandals with it. It's just like everybody knows what it does. It was illegal for a reason. And the ruling that wound up undoing it in like 2018 was one of those classic like John Roberts type things where they were just sort of like, no, we fixed that. It's not a problem anymore. The Voting Rights Act is unnecessary. And they just like threw it out there to see what would happen. And this is what fucking happened. There's a lot of money going into advertising it. People are very susceptible to this. And the easier you make it for people to bet on stuff, the easier it becomes to activate that small portion of the population that is just wired in the way that people's brains are wired to get addicted to gambling. And that really fucks people's lives up. So the idea of leagues doing it, I mean, you can see the business calculation you can see it if you follow contemporary sports ownership fuckery closely. Because there's a lot of like short-term thinking on the part of these guys, that there's a lot of sort of like making this amount of money, watching the value of your team go up or whatever, and then theoretically you cash out. There's not a lot of people that own teams, especially in baseball, but really in pretty much every major sport. The one exception is maybe the NFL, because I think more owners think of that as like a family heirloom. None of these guys are thinking about where's the league going to be in 10 years or 20 years or whatever, because they expect to be fucked off by them. They expect to have like banked a few $1 billion and moved on.
Yeah, and sold their team to Las Vegas.
Right.
Which is basically sports franchises in the mecca of legal gambling.
Yeah.
Which is a thing that was never allowed previously.
Yeah. Mark Cuban sold a bunch of the Mavericks to the Adelson family, which is like, again, one of those things where, I mean, that should be an obvious no-go for a couple of reasons. Like, if you're familiar with the Adelsons, even if you've been shown a photo of Sheldon Adelson, you should be like, no, that's
he
that's a Harkonnen. That's a minor Harkonnen. You can't do that.
But I mean, I don't know. Like, I guess like it is unquestionable that like people have always bet on sports, and that betting has always been a part of sports culture, and now it's become a mainstream part of sports culture. And this puts me in like an awkward position, because usually on this show I'm pro vice and the legalization of all vices. And like, you know, like the idea is that like, yeah, it probably should be legal. People are going to gamble on it, and it's probably best that like, you know, it be regulated in some way, or people aren't getting their legs broken. But I wonder, like, outside of the old school bookie, which is like you'd have to go to like the social club, you have to know someone, and then they might break your thumbs if you can't pay. But it's just like the greased rails, where it's like no one will break your legs, but you will end up in absolute destitution, like in light speed.
Yeah,
with the, like
just by booping around on your phone too.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
That was something we ran a story on this last week by Corbin Smith that I thought was really good at defector.com. That's my plug for it. But it was he talked to an addiction specialist in it, who talked about how hard it is to get people that are addicted to gambling to sort of stop gambling. But before you could do it on your phone and like just completely fuck your life up with like 2 apps that you've given access to your checking account or whatever. That it used to be that there's like, the specialist talks about it. He's like, you know, if your ride home takes you past a casino, you need to take a different route home. And that there were practical, it's that bad an addiction. But then it was when it is like a literal brick and mortar affair, you can do stuff like that. You can avoid seeing a casino. There's a list that you can get on as a gambler at casinos that basically stipulates like, do not let this person gamble here. And all the casinos have to sign on to it, and they have. So if you go in there and you're on that list, they see your face, they know who you are, and they won't let you play. That's not the case on something that happens on a phone. And there's, you know, even if you made rules on it, like there's not a VPN for like going into a casino, but there is for using shit on your phone or using a computer for it. And so that the ease of it with which you can like sort of screw this up, even if, I mean, it's sort of, I guess this is like a separate thought, but it's fascinating to me that how this, I mean, as bad a problem as this was for the people that it was a problem for, it wasn't a cultural problem until it got moved into that like circa now realm of shit that you can do without talking to or seeing anybody, where you just do it on your phone. That like any of the really bad habits, like nobody could become like deranged by pornography at the level that like people are now deranged by pornography. When you had to like buy a ticket from a guy who obviously didn't think very much of you, like you couldn't consume it in sufficient volume until now.
Sheepishly approach a news kiosk as a 15-year-old boy, and then just slap a $10 down and try to say penthouse under your breath as softly as possible, thinking that your math teacher is going to be standing behind you. And look, once again, I'm pro-vice, I'm pro-pornography, but it is undeniable that like instant access to hardcore internet pornography has cooked the brains of God knows how many people. And you see evidence of that every day.
That's what I feel. And so I sort of am the same way on it, in the sense that I don't think that I'm not for banning any of that. I just feel like there should be a way, and like this is something that would require a level of cultural commitment that I think is like really, really hard to find anywhere in our society at this moment, to just like making it possible for people to consume this in a responsible way, or for that people to sort of understand what it is that they're doing. And the pornography thing was glib. I mean, that's different. Like you can watch too much porn and it makes you weird or whatever, but that's fine. You're not going to bankrupt yourself on it. You're not going to like put your parents' house up because you have like a thought about Saquon Barkley scoring 1.5 touchdowns on Thursday Night Football.
Yeah, no. And and like more so than any other addiction, gambling addiction is one of the most dangerous. Not maybe in terms of ending your life, but ending your life financially, which for a lot of people leads to suicide and could be like just as bad, really, as like ODing. Like it is, and David, why do you think it is? And like all of the research on this shows that it is young millennial men that are the most like, it is like the most concentrated like affecting of like the young male mind and like sort of initiating them into gambling addiction. And like whether you started like doing fantasy leagues or whatever, but then like the escalation of it, like where do you think that comes from? And like why do you think young men in this country are so susceptible to like really fucking themselves up by gambling?
It's a good question, because it's like, it's so like in the data that is out there on this, it is like such an incredible outlier. Like it is just that demo and then basically the most problematic portion of that demo that like floats the industry. That there isn't really, this isn't a problem that, you know, outside of the people that might otherwise have gambling issues otherwise, just that sector has made this the profitable business that it is. I think that, you know, I don't want to believe that the commercials where Aaron Paul talks to you like you have a 48 IQ. Like, I don't think that that's the sort of thing that you, like, no one's getting like bullied into it. But I do think it's the sort of thing that, as somebody who's like done this myself, like, you know, not at like a very high level, but like we have like, you know, weekly fantasy for work. And like, I've been in fantasy leagues with my friends for like 20 years. That with any of that, I think that doing it a little bit and just accepting that you're either going to make or lose $5 is pretty normal. I think that there's a way in which winning or losing at some propitious time for some reason or another can like flip a switch where you start thinking. I remember like talking to a guy that had won one of those crazy parlays that nobody wins, like a 5-leg
like
prediction.
Uncut Gems. Like,
yes.
Yeah.
Like he really did. He cast the Mike Francesa's stupidest fucking bet I
yeah.
ever heard in my life. Yeah.
Yeah.
I disagree. Gary.
But he won. And he'd like obviously given all that money back since. And he knew that he had given all that money back since. And that the space where I was with them, it was like him and his friends had all put bets on a game. They were all fucking losing because they were all betting on like the fullback scoring a touchdown. You know, like all these like little goofy props that you can have. And it's like, it's fun if you're doing it and you're like able to have it be, you know, like just something that you're doing with $5 to screw off. Like, you know, I might tell people how to spend their money or whatever, but that sort of adds up. And I think the idea that like somehow this could be a difference making thing in your life, that if you cast some $10 bet on a 5-leg parlay that hits at 1,000 to 1 odds, like that, it really like your life would change for that. But if you cast 10 of those $10 bets every weekend and you fucking lose all of them, as you will for the most part, they're designed that way, then, you know, this becomes the sort of thing where just to watch any sporting event, you're basically charging yourself 40 or $50 to enjoy it the way that you used to. Like that seems really grim to me.
I think like the reason that like it hits young men like 18 to 34, 18 to 24, whatever, specifically the hardest is that is the group of people who are most likely to believe that they are the outliers to all statistics.
Yeah.
Right.
Like a young, if you tell a young man that there's like a 0.0005% chance of, having lifetime profitability on sports gambling through parlays, they'll go, well, yeah, but I have a different strategy.
Right.
So
I'm
you're
different
saying
from
there's a
everyone
chance.
else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's also, that makes sense to me too, because I think so much of the way that people like that are marketed to is through stuff like that, where it's just sort of like this idea, any type of idiot secret knowledge is like more valuable because of the fact that it's secret or that it like goes against the odds.
Exactly. Yeah. It's the same part of the male brain that like, when you're younger makes you fantasize about like taking down a mass shooter.
Yep.
Even though there's like no logical component that would suggest you'd be able to do it. Just the fact that you're fantasizing about it and you want to do it means that you will be able to.
Can I add another suggestion to that, Matrix? Same demographic has come up with on sports, having fantasy leagues and the gamification be a part of their entire experience with it, which not only primes you to interact with the sport in a second screen experience, but also gives you the fantasy that you are experiencing the sport as a manager. And that you have some kind of secret information or a better, as Felix said, a better strategy than anybody else does. That you are seeing the game with clearer eyes than your average rube down at the sports bookie.
Yeah.
You
And
are a
then
man. You
there's-
are one of the leaders of the
Yeah.
team, so you
And
should
that-
know how to do it.
dovetails really well with like the other aspect of what Felix was talking about too, because it's like, as someone who's had fantasy teams for a long time, like I feel like it keeps me up on what's going on in the sport. Like I know a lot of stuff. I'm monitoring things that way. I mean, I don't know it in the way that I would if I like worked in a front office or if I like understood data, but I know the names of a lot of different guys, I guess is what I'm saying.
I mean,
But
if you
then
know the
there's this
names of a lot of
other-
different guys, that's an economic plan for your future.
It is. That's
I know
where it
the names of
starts.
so many NBA players.
Right.
And now that
So-
I'm getting into this, and I'm like, each one of those is a money making node.
That's exactly.
You can
That's what I was
connect.
going to say.
Yeah.
Is that all of this? You just got to turn your grind set up a little bit, and then you're like, well, if I know who's starting for the Cincinnati Reds today, then don't I also know whether they're going to win or not? Don't I know whether they're going to pitch more than 5 innings or like strike out 6 or fewer guys or whatever? And that is like, you don't like. There's a bit of it that you can learn by like clicking around, and then there's a bit of it that nobody knows, or that you would have to be like dedicating yourself to it full time to know. But the idea that any of this could be like passive income, which is like the real fantasy of American life, like is a powerful thing.
Yeah, it is very interesting to see it like infect all sports and, the top 3 sports in America, because gambling was already baked in with MMA, because MMA was uniquely in America, at least, was uniquely centralized to Las Vegas. And even outside of America, it was so intertwined with organized crime, whether it be in, Japan with the Yakuza, or like Dutch kickboxing and its numerous links to organized crime. Those two things went hand in hand. With MMA, there was this interesting thing that I saw with the, with the fandom community prior to it blowing up in popularity in these last 5 years, where that entire world used to be very centralized, where like the fighters, the coaches, the fans, the commentators would all post on the same forums, more or less, the same 2 places. And everyone kind of knew each other. And you would constantly see people being elevated, people who were just complete degenerate gamblers, because they would win like 1 or 2 big parlays. Like they would, lose money 9 times out of 10, but they would, cast their lot with one insane underdog who, actually turned out to win. And these people like would go on to sort of become like cult media figures who, because they were good at gambling, became like these proto Tate figures in like 2011 and 2012, who would offer like advice on all avenues of life because they had advanced this secret knowledge through gambling.
Yeah, that's always been like a personality type. It's also been weird, as you said, that most of those guys lose most of the time. That like when I was a kid, and Will, you're probably like a little too young to remember this, but like Jimmy the Greek, is that a name that rings any bells for you?
I remember Jimmy the Greek.
All right, so there were like guys like that, but they were these kind of like cartoon type characters. Like Jimmy the Greek is a guy that like I remember basically as a Henson Workshop puppet, like not a real guy. Like he's made of felt in my recollection.
I'll always remember the Simpsons parody of Jimmy the Greek, Smooth Jimmy Apollo.
I hereby declare Miami to be Smooth Jimmy's Lock of the Week.
Ooh, that's a big lock, all right.
Where he gives his lock of the week and Homer bets on it. And then he goes like, this guy told me it was a lock. And then he comes back after the game is over and goes, folks, when you're right 52% of the time, it means you're wrong the other 48. And he was like, you should have said that at the beginning. We, of course, you'll always remember Jimmy the Greek fondly for his thoughts on the history of race in America and why football players are so good at the game they play.
Yeah, that's the other bit that Felix was talking about too. The thing where it's like, well, I won. Like I was able to successfully predict every AFC East team's game like outcomes last week, and that has like taught me things about the way that vaccines work that other people couldn't possibly comprehend.
Yeah.
I think what you're talking about shows like a major degeneration of American culture, because like, yeah, a sports gambler used to be something that everyone made fun of, even if it was a popular thing to do. Like a sports gambler is inherently ridiculous because they believe themselves to have information that no one else has, which is impossible unless you're Ace Rothstein.
Yeah.
But now it's like one of the cool things you can do. It gets you out of the Matrix.
But it's like a cool thing that you can do without like engaging with other people. It's like the way that that you see like those ads for like Uber Eats and stuff, where it's like if you're practicing self-care, you should really be ordering from the Shake Shack that's 100 yards from your door and having someone bring it to you. But they're like making it look like this is like what it is to be like a fulfilled person. Whereas I think this is like speaks to the power of how shitty fucking casinos and especially off-track betting parlors were. That this is like an essential human wish to like bet on things and win money for something you didn't have to do anything for. And yet for generations, just making the spaces that you could go to do that so unpleasant.
Like the seediest places on earth. I remember my school bus let me out in like the school bus dropped me off on 92nd and Broadway right in front of an off-track betting parlor. And my parents are always like, don't dawdle. Go walk to West End immediately. Stay
Do
away.
not make eye contact.
It's 3:30 in the afternoon on a weekday. Like the crowd at the off-track betting parlor is like everyone understood these were scum. These are the pariahs of society. But
not in like a colorful way either.
No.
This is the bit. So I got an email from a reader who was talking about the way. So basically, the American model of like legalizing gambling on your phone is all following the way that it got done in the UK. And it was very, very successful there. One bit that I thought was funny, the way that they like following it, not just like in terms of like how the technology works, but following it that apparently there were ads in the UK where instead of Jamie Foxx or Aaron Paul, it was Ray Winstone saying bet like a geezer. But like in like the tough Ray Winstone voice where he'd be like, in it, like what?
His Cockney East End villain accent.
But that was like the idea there was that like, you know, are you like a little wimpy Nigel or are you a cool Ray Winstone placing a bet on, you know, whatever Luton Town's outcome that day? But that like, I mean, obviously you carry it over. It sort of says something that our version of Ray Winstone is just Aaron Paul wearing a thin gold chain, just kind of drag. But yeah, like that bit of it is like you break it out of the context where it sucks. And then you're like, no, now it's the cool thing. Like you can be the cool guy that has a bookie, but you don't actually have to like make eye contact with another person.
We can choose from over 100,000 live sports events every year. Just like that. We are members of the world's favourite online sports betting company, and we gamble responsibly at Bet365.
Like in discussing this particularly and like how it affects the brains of young men, I think it's very similar to Felix, an observation you made like, you know, a while ago when we were discussing the NFT boom and like who the fuck would think you can make money off this? Well, some people did make money off of it and made a lot of it doing essentially nothing. But Felix, I think like what you said is like it's the dream and the hope of like upward mobility and like freedom from like just being under the gun and white knuckling it all the time. And the idea that you can liberate yourself and achieve a level of financial independence or stability that your parents had through, you know, like through watching TV. And like, that's the other thing. Unlike stocks or whatever, where like, you know, you can be a day trader, but you have to watch CNBC or like the Fox Business Channel all day. That's boring as fuck. Whereas if you just watch ESPN or Fox Sports or whatever, you're seeing get a little Stephen A in there, Chris Russo. You guys see these personalities, and then you can begin to tell yourself that, like, oh, like I have access to information. I'm seeing through the ones and the zeros, and then as you said, like then it gets to this idea where like I figured out like how to bet against the spread, so I can now discern psyops everywhere they arise in society.
Fantastic. It is. That's a really good point, though. The idea of like having to put up with like just quietly reading like a Warren Buffett investor letter is boring, but like watching Anthony Edwards and being like, he's cold as fuck. I think he's going to score 51 points or more tomorrow. Like definitely a better choice.
I'm placing my entire financial future on betting on individuals who Stephen A. Smith refers to as this brother. Yeah. This brother right here. This brother is the truth. So I'm like, well, if Stephen A. says it, then I'm buying.
Yeah. You're like breaking it down to be like how many times he blinks per minute when he's talking about a guy, and if it's like above 30, you're like, whoa, okay,
yeah,
I'm onto something.
If Stephen A. is doing a remote from Miami, the game after this team you bet on winning, that's how you know you doubled down each time. If Stephen A. is in Miami, that's just sure double down every time. But I want to talk about like two recent examples of scandals in the major sporting leagues that just happened this year. And I'm wondering, David, for our listeners who are, reedy, asthmatic, they're probably reading Hegel or just playing video games or something, and they haven't been up on the Shohei Ohtani gambling scandal. First of all, could you describe to our listeners who perhaps don't follow baseball who Shohei Ohtani is, and then like the outlines of the like major gambling scandal that embroiled probably the biggest baseball player in the world this year?
So Shohei Ohtani is basically the only person since Babe Ruth that it's made any sense to compare to Babe Ruth. He is, when he's healthy, which he's not as a pitcher this year, he is one of the very best pitchers in baseball and also one of the very best hitters in baseball. He's also this big, beautiful, sunny himbo from Japan, who's been amazing basically from the moment he came over here. He got stuck on some bad teams. He's now on the Dodgers, hitting better than anyone in baseball for a team that, they're the Dodgers, so they're not going to win the World Series, but they definitely could in terms of how good their roster is. Made a lot of money. He signed a $700 million contract this offseason, which is by far the richest in the history of American professional sports. And it's got a lot of deferrals in it, but he doesn't really
he's getting most of that money after he retires.
Yeah. And so apparently part of the reason for that is that he makes so much money on endorsements in Japan and in the United States that he basically just, like, the salary that he gets is like a meal money, and he doesn't seem to have any actual interests that anybody knew of until this one that I'm getting to. Like, he was just sort of like a guy who was into working out and hitting baseballs. Like, when he got a dog, it was big news because they were just sort of like, oh my God, like a personality aspect. That's really interesting. We didn't know. It's a cute dog, to be fair. I got to hand it to Shohei on that. But anyway, he, earlier this offseason, his interpreter, who'd been with him from the moment he signed with the Angels and was still with him with the Dodgers, was arrested by the feds for having, he ran up, it was something like $17 million in gambling debts. His interpreter does not get paid nearly well enough to do that. And he got that money basically by, as a lot of interpreters do in professional sports. This is something I did not know until this broke. He basically had access to Ohtani's checking account to do like day-to-day basic business shit for him, and was just helping himself to hundreds of thousands of dollars at a time and spending those, just blowing them nightly on shitty sports bets. He started off on the apps like everybody else, but then eventually wound up getting like an offshore bookie, which you need to do if you're doing, that type of
if you're placing bets of that size, right?
Yeah.
He was placing wagers that were in like hundreds of thousands of dollars, or
Yeah.
if not in the millions of dollars.
Routinely.
Yeah.
And so that eventually became an issue. I mean, like, it wasn't just like, he's not necessarily in as much trouble for placing those bets as he is for basically doing the sort of definitional financial fraud shit that was required to get Ohtani's money into his account and then into those bets. And he's looking at, it's something that's like 30 years of jail time for this, that there's a lot of just really obvious red letter fraud shit that you can't do there. The reason that this was as big a story as it was, though, was that because this money was coming from Ohtani's account, and because Ohtani is the most important person to the success of baseball at basically every level. I mean, he's like the most marketable and the best new player that the sport has seen in, generations since I was cheering for it, and I'm old. That there's that aspect of him being involved raised all these questions about, like, was it Ohtani that was placing these bets? Which, if it had been, would have been like an existential threat for the sport. Like, baseball's the sport that's been disrupted by gambling scandals in the past, the most famous being the Chicago White Sox throwing the World Series in 1919 at the behest of different gamblers.
Arnold Rothstein,
the king. I'm reading a book in which he figures now, and his hangout was a place in Times Square that invented the Reuben sandwich. That was where Arnold Rothstein liked to spend his time.
Is it still around?
No, sadly. It was also called Reuben's, which I was kind of disappointed by. Like, I was sort of hoping that there was more of a backstory there. It wasn't it. It was just the sandwich they served. Anyway, the Ohtani aspect of this quickly and I think, to me, decently convincingly went by the boards. The interpreter was like, no, this was all me. I ripped my friend off. I deserve everything that's coming to me. I fucked up. There's also another school of thought that is basically like, this is what you would have this guy do if you were the owner of the Dodgers or Shohei Ohtani or Major League Baseball, and you didn't want to, fuck this all up for yourself, this golden goose that you've got in this player. Either way, it was like a bad story right at the very, very start of the season.
I mean, when this story broke and it was talking about like how the translator was arranging wire transfers from Ohtani's account to cover his gambling losses, that, like, in my mind, I was like, how is this possible? I can't arrange a wire transfer for someone else's bank account for like hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. But then like the interpreter angle and the fact that like you're in a foreign country and your interpreter really is like the kind of, I don't know, like you're the front facing you to interact with the rest of this world. So there is some credibility to the idea that like, yeah, Ohtani would have given him access to his accounts, but I don't know. I want to talk about the other one, the NBA gambling story.
This
which
one is
my favorite. This one is even better because this involves an active player influencing games. This is Jonte Porter of the Toronto Raptors, who's just received a lifetime ban from the NBA because this is like, there are a number of extremely suspicious prop bets placed on this like D-list player.
Yep.
I mean, this is a guy like who nobody would ever think to bet on or be aware of what his stat lines are. But basically, there are these huge prop bets placed on like, would he have a bad performance in a game he was in?
But in the most minor ways too.
Yeah,
it was
like
will he take
under
and
5.5 points a game? Yeah. And if you were like, I said this at the time, if you were betting the over-under on Jonte Porter's like overall points in a game without insider info, you are truly a degenerate gambler.
Yeah, you should
that is mind-boggling to me.
Like, honestly, for both, you should go to jail for either of those reasons. Like, if you're fixing it, if you're doing what he was doing, and you're like taking yourself out of the game with a phantom injury so you don't accidentally get a rebound and fuck up your bet, like, obviously that is a crime. But yes, if you're somebody that's like, you could be doing anything, like there's like any movie that you want to watch, like you could just stream it. It's right there. And instead they're just sort of like, I think the Jonte Porter is going to get an assist tonight. And I'm going to bet on it.
Yeah, it's the same thing as like, guys who can put together off the top of their heads a list of their 500 favorite porn stars.
Yes.
where it's like, okay, you're like technically not a sex offender, but like, you should be on some type of map.
Right.
We all agree.
Like, this is so to put Porter in perspective too, like, do you want to talk at all about his brother and his weird family? Or you?
I mean, his whole family.
Oh my God.
They're real. They're real. Yeah,
they're awesome.
Yeah.
They're the greatest family.
Please go. Yeah.
Felix, do you want to do it? You seem like you're a fan. They're like the average Missouri Trump voting people, except for they're all very tall. And one of them is like the third best player on the Nuggets.
They're sort of like the Jones family, like John Jones's family, but like replace athletic abilities with different crimes, even more so than the Joneses. I know about the one brother who he killed somebody during a DUI, and now he has a podcast.
Yep.
Well, then there's Michael Porter Jr., the probably the most functional brother, who's like the best athlete. Michael Porter, who's on the Nuggets. He, like every athlete now, and this is honestly, I know we're supposed to be talking about gambling, but in my opinion, the real scandal in sports today is that they all have fucking podcasts.
Too many podcasts. They're filming
all
them.
Trying to horn in on these pretenders just because they have godlike athletic talent think they can hop on the mic and
Porter's
do what
is
I
amazing.
do.
Too, because he's right. So you wouldn't go out there.
Michael Porter Jr.'s podcast is great because he'll just have like porn stars on to talk about the NBA players they fucked and tell stories like, and it'll just be like, wow, that's crazy. And he'll be like, a lot of guys, they just get tired of sleeping with women, and now they're fucking with men. And, wow, that's nuts.
That's crazy. So this is what's great about Michael Porter Jr.'s podcast, which is terrible and you should not listen to or watch. But he is as awkward talking to NBA players about NBA basketball as he was talking to like Lana Rhodes about getting flown out by somebody. Like in both cases, he's just classically, he tops out at like, haha, that's crazy. That's about as far as he can go. But he will just say that to anybody. He had the, is it the Nelk Boys, I believe? It's just like kind of like a bro-y culture type podcast. He had them on recently. And it's the same sort of deal where like they'd start talking about something and he's like uncomfortable because he doesn't want to say anything. I guess it's going to like fuck his money up or whatever. but also he like, there's a sense that he knows like maybe 250 words. And so he's constantly bumping up against the ceiling.
Jokic knows
like,
more
what he
words
can
in
say.
English than he does.
Yeah. He has a real, like kind of skin job, sort of feeling. Like there's a replicant energy to him. And he is easily the most normal of the Porter brothers. There's another one that got an
have you ever
extreme
retired
DWI.
an NBA player by mistake?
Yep.
Well, yeah. I know, so his other brother, Jonte, who's like a also ran like G League guy for the Raptors. I mean, well, this is where the gambling stuff comes in because he was a G League player and he was betting on NBA games when he was in the G League. And then he got called up by the Raptors, and it was all very clear he would continue to gamble not on his own NBA games, but other NBA games being played. And then it came out that he was literally influencing games by taking himself out of games.
Yeah.
He's like, "Oh, I have an eye infection. My eye hurts." He scores 5 points, then he goes to the sideline. He says, "Coach, like you gotta take me out. I'm ill." So like assuring that there would be this huge payday. But then like it seems brilliant, right? But like they caught that immediately because, as I said before, who the fuck is gambling the under on Jonte Porter? And there was a payout of like huge money.
Yeah, it wasn't. What's funny with it is that, so this is the other thing about Jonte Porter is that, and this is like sort of connects back to a point that Felix was making earlier, that like he before, like in the ways that like all the Porter brothers have different defects and they're all highly online. Jonte had like a sort of a grind set financial advice, not even just a podcast. There was like a subscription service for like $50 a month. He would put you on game about like what NFTs were definitely going to make you money. And he'd been doing that for a long time too. And so this is like an extension of the same thing. Like it's that basic level of like sociopathy that is shot through that entire approach to the world. Just, he couldn't like turn it off when there was a chance to make an extra, whatever, $20,000 off some shit that he did, even though this is like the one thing that you can't do. That like there's, especially like in what you were saying, betting on other sports, using the apps for gambling, plenty of players have gotten in trouble for that. Like in the NFL, a bunch of like even notable players, Calvin Ridley was basically suspended for a whole season for it. The leagues don't want you to do it. But also they're all taking money from those apps. They're all in bed with them business-wise. And so there's a sort of argument that you could make where it's like, well, as long as I'm not impacting the integrity of the game, you know, if I have like the same or slightly higher level of inside information as the people that are actually gambling on these, then like, what am I doing wrong? Jonte Porter does not have that argument to make. He's basically fixing his own bets by pretending that he has a Charlie horse and demanding to go back and see the trainer.
But it comes into like of guys who are like not at the highest level of like paychecks or endorsements. Now that like the leagues and these bookies are so intertwined, like, you know, the temptation is so present, especially with things like prop bets, because if you're like, it is so easy to affect the outcome, as we see in the Jonte Porter case, and it's like the money is, once again, like the allure of easy money is just so powerful that like it's hard to think that you can kind of like compartmentalize these things, especially when gambling in 38 states is now completely legal. And if you're a professional athlete, you have the same rights to, have a flutter as everyone else does.
Yep. There's also the other thing about this in terms of the, like, that's all true. And it is especially true even for if you're making the sort of money that a Jonte Porter is making. Even, I mean, whatever, Michael Porter Jr. is a centimillionaire. Like, he's like, that family is fine. Jonte Porter was making in, the six figures this year. You can place a prop bet on a college game in a lot of states, the United States, on a college player. Like, those guys don't get paid at all in a lot of instances. And so, like, again, you could say that that's minor shit because, like, no one cares if the eighth guy on UNC Charlotte does or doesn't make a free throw. But also, like, if there's enough of it happening, it's, like, obviously eroding the integrity of it. And also, like, college has traditionally been where gambling scandals have happened. If you're not going to pay these guys and you're going to get into business with all of these gambling apps and make it as easy as it could possibly be for people to bet on stuff like that, then you're creating, like, there's not a more fertile breeding ground for a scandal that I could imagine than introducing all of this money and then putting it on the other side of just a piece of wax paper from all of these unpaid athletes who could conceivably be grabbing their share of it.
I mean, I guess to take a broader view here, Felix, I think about this in terms of something you've said in the past too, about like the curious way in which the state sort of like legalizes certain vices as a substitute for like giving people things they actually want, whether it's marijuana. And I'm not saying like they shouldn't do those things, but it is curious because I do like research for this. It was 1964. New Hampshire became the first American state to have a lottery. And previously that was just known as the numbers, and the mafia ran that. Now every state like basically funds their Department of Education through scratch tickets and the fucking lottery. But now I think with these legalized gambling things, I think it's just like it's another way for the state loves it despite all of the like social consequences of it, because it allows them to raise revenue without cutting spending or raising taxes. I mean, it's perfect for them. But like, do you think there's another element here of just like sort of placating like people's certain like atavistic like desires in lieu of like actually improving their lives?
Yeah, I think that it's like the rush to legalize sports gambling among like state authorities. Like obviously, primarily, it's just like corruption, right? Like with everything. But I also think it's the inverse of another phenomenon we see, which is, in a lot of like very deep blue cities and states where they will, in order to look busy, they'll do something like ban like flavored vapes or something, right? This is the inverse of that. And you see it more commonly in like red states, but also, some blue states, not quite as deep blue, where like this is the more, I guess, center-right version of it, where it's looking busy and it's like throwing a bone to people.
Yeah.
But throwing a bone to people in a way that will increase your revenue, secures a position for you when you're out of office, etc.
Yep. And it has that sort of free real estate. It's free real estate. Like resonance to it, because you don't actually have to do anything. You're just basically like getting your percentage of the amount of money that goes into the people that are making all the money on it. But you don't necessarily regulate it, or if you are regulating it, you're regulating it in this very token way. And then this is the bit of it that like really resonates to me as like kind of being like uniform across blue cities and red states, is that all of this is enforced through like arbitrary punishments of people who or not arbitrary, but like punishments issued seemingly at random to people who are unfortunate in terms of finding themselves on the wrong side of it, while the actual money that is being made off this stuff is being made by entities and shared in that proportion with the state and people that are in charge without interruption. So it's the difference between the way that like in New York, that they recently have been busting a lot of those like sort of like illegal or like quasi-legal like weed bodegas where they're like not really dispensaries, but they do sell edibles. And that's just like, that is catnip for fucking cops, because they're busting
Dr.
people
Mario Zaza Emporium.
Right.
Rated, yeah.
We have one by us that's right near the Best Buy that's just called Best Buds, and the logo is exactly the same, except for it's, which I really respect that they're just like, whatever, what are you going to do? Arrest me? But the answer is yes. Like, they will fucking arrest you. Like, some cop will come in, and that's where the actual, punishment is getting done, is, somebody buying something there or someone selling them something there. Whereas it's like people have agreed that this is legal, but there is this urge to just like fuck somebody up regardless for participating in it. It's not only it's not equal. Like, I just don't see how, I mean, it's very sustainable. It's like what the country's built on. I just don't exactly understand who it serves.
I guess the last thing I'll say here on this is a fact that's always stuck with me. Something Amber Frost told me about studies of like gambling addicts and like what parts of their brains are like activated by gambling. And they found that for a compulsive gambler, losing $10,000 activates and satisfies the same need in terms of an addiction as winning $10,000.
Yeah, it's about the risk. And I mean, again, like that's the sort of thing where this is a point that Corbin made in his story, is that like gambling addiction, of all the addictions, like drug addiction and alcohol are in the DSM, like the manual of psychiatric disorders. No other addiction that people get treatment for, sex addiction, any of that shit, none of that is in there except for gambling. It's the one that is like documented to work in this very specific way that puts it on the same order as these other chemical addictions.
Yeah, it's like you can't be like addicted to heroin, and it's just like not shooting a dime bag of smack makes me feel exactly the same way as fixing does.
I just started injecting saline solution into my arm. I lost weight.
What I really like is needles.
Yeah.
Back to RFK Jr.
Yep.
All right. But before we go, I know we're going a little long. I do have like a very brief rating series about a commencement address at the Ohio State University. Do you guys want to do that real quick?
Yeah.
Did you guys hear the story about this?
Chris Pan chat?
This is about the quote unquote the worst commencement address of all time. To which I got to say, this is better. This guy gave a better commencement address than anything I've certainly participated in. R.I.P. Tim Russert or read about. But I just want to read here some highlights here.
Good commencement speech?
No,
actually?
never. I mean, there's got to be at least one. There's got to be at least one that people like.
This is water.
The lady that gave the speech at my college graduation later signed the letter blasting Jonathan Glazer for his Oscar speech. And you could really see that she was heading in that direction at that time. Not as like her politics. I was just sort of like, this lady seems wrong about a lot of really important shit. I'm like, I'm a hungover 22-year-old. I shouldn't be seeing this quite so clearly.
So this is an Ohio State University commencement speech delivered at the school on Sunday by an alum named Christopher Pan, described in a pre-graduation press release as a social entrepreneur, has made a bit of a stir for its focus on two subjects that are not generally covered in commencement speeches, namely Bitcoin and Pan's own inspirational wristband company.
That's right.
Videos posted online and coverage of the local muckraking site The Rooster documented Pan's 17-minute address in which he sang the Four Non-Blonde song "What's Up" for 60 seconds and then led the crowd in what he said was a Navy SEAL endorsed breathing technique. I mean, I don't know what would be worse, being asked to breathe like a Navy SEAL or having to listen to a Four Non-Blonde song. I guess what is this? Is "What's Up"? Is that different than "What's Going On"? That's the only Four Non-Blonde.
It's the
same song.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. The really annoying one. He also delivered a riff about financial, emotional, and spiritual freedom that culminated in an exhortation to invest in Bitcoin, which was met with an instant stadium-wide groaning you can watch here.
So I know this might feel polarizing, but I encourage you to keep an open mind right now.
No.
I see Bitcoin.
At the Rooster site, they have drafts of the speech that this guy was like working on, like as he turned in, and it says here, these are clips from things that were cut out of the speech. In his original draft, he has a line that says, "What if you replace the word racism with hate? That is the root problem, and it's not just racism happening. A lot of other isms too." Okay. It says here, version 8 of the speech contains some incredible content from
version 8.
Yeah, from imploring students to invest in Bitcoin to this sublime footnote. And then it's like and it's like a footnote here, just a little note to remind himself. It says, "Move this to before the singing so those who identify as alpha males will buy in more." I would just like to point out that somebody died at this commencement speech too. Someone literally died at the University of Ohio speech. Presumably because they had to listen to this. Demonstrated the purported growth potential of the cryptocurrency by bringing Ohio State's president to the podium for a magic trick in which 3/4 changed into an oversized gold Bitcoin.
So like, this is what I like. Ever since I've started seeing clips of this, how did they choose this guy?
So this is a really good question. This is in the story, I think, right? Well,
yeah, he's a University of Ohio alum, and apparently he was bragging that he wrote this speech on ayahuasca.
So the Ohio State had like a faculty student like blue chip panel that every year recommends. There's like they start with 100 people and they narrow it down, and then they bring the list to the president. And this guy was obviously not fucking on that list. Like the list, as I remember it from the post that I read earlier today, it was like LeBron James, Joe Biden. Like it was like, it's Ohio State. You can get whoever you want. And in this case, it was this dude, the president, who apparently is also at the very least, like Bitcoin curious, was kind of like, these are great names. I appreciate it. And like, honestly, it would be great to get LeBron, but I've got a guy that I think is going to do better. He does some close-up coin magic, and he sings songs from 120 minutes. And
like,
he's like,
how are you gonna, like, you're advertising Ohio State to the planet, to the world? Like, this is what our institution stands for, and the guy you're choosing runs a fucking Bitcoin wristband company.
The wristbands are so good. That honestly is like a nice little reminder to myself that I should be making sure to pay attention to Eric Adams' different commencement addresses this year, because like that is, it's such a weird red flag to have in it, because it's like, it's not the sort of thing where it's like, guys shouldn't be wearing jewelry, they should be eating stew or whatever. Like, I'm not trying to play that angle, but there is, when I see somebody that has got like more than one Live Strong bracelet on, I'm like, that person like is very highly leveraged and is going to try to sell me like vitamins that I don't want.
Other highlights from the speech include spending 4 minutes leading an exercise in which listeners were supposed to concentrate on generating a single word that expresses intention for their life, which not coincidentally is related to the mission of what it described in Pan's OSU bio as a company he founded that is called My Intent and prints custom intention words and phrases on bracelets. My Intent appears to be incorporated as a benefit corporation, which is a for-profit business that also has a public service mission.
So this guy is a friendship bracelet entrepreneur?
Yeah, it's a friendship bracelet entrepreneur, but he's also, he's diversified, Felix. That cheapens his accomplishments. He also owns Dogecoin.
Oh, okay. Okay. That's a lot more impressive.
The sense that I'm getting from this is that this dude is like used to operating in like a room of 20 people, all of whom own Bored Apes. And you could fit like 100,000 people in Ohio State's football stadium. Like, this is too big a room for this dude to be in.
He also let us sing along, not just to Four Non-Blondes, but This Little Light of Mine. After the speech, the Rooster noted that Pan appears to have implied in a LinkedIn post that he took ayahuasca to help write his address. The idea that you would take one of the most powerful hallucinogens on the planet to come up with Navy SEAL breathing exercises, some close-up magic, and a plea to invest in Bitcoin. This is what the Clockwork Elves told you from like that you return from the spirit realm, and this is the revelation. You're like Moses coming down from Mount Sinai, and you're like, intention bracelets.
Yep. That kind of fits for me, honestly, that's like, you take the most powerful drug you can to have the wildest thoughts that you could possibly have, and the wildest thought that this guy can have is like, it's Bitcoin. You should just
Bitcoin.
Buy Bitcoin. Like, it's just fantastic.
Well, best of luck to the University of Ohio grads, and a special best of luck to this weekend's University of Wisconsin at Madison grads. I will be attending the graduation this weekend. I'm imploring the students, please do not cancel this graduation. Please don't cancel this graduation with protest. I really do want to go to it.
Do you have any idea what you're going to say yet, or are you just going to take some notes and write something down?
I'm gonna get the students in on gambling.
Somebody's got to do it.
Yeah. I'm actually currently have a $50 stake going with Amber Frost over the Knicks Pacers series. We'll see how that turns out. Now, I will be attending a graduation at University of Wisconsin Madison this weekend. So, and if you're a Grey Wolf, especially if you're involved in any of the protests or encampments, please give me a shout out. Drop me a line. I'd love to show you some love this weekend.
I will be making the commencement address at my alma mater, University of St. Thomas. I plan on being murdered by the crowd when I suggest at the 2 hour and 45 minute point of my 5 hour speech, when I suggest that the graduates invest all of their savings and their financial aid into Counter-Strike Global Offensive 2 weapon skins. The market is only going up.
Best of luck to all the dads and grads out there this weekend. But yeah,
before we go, David, I have one more baseball related question to you.
Sure.
He came up earlier, but now with all this fucking gambling, P. Rose, it's time to put him in the Hall of Fame, right? He has outlived the gambling scandal. It is no longer a scandal.
I will say that he managed to not get any better, but yes, his case is like at this point ironclad. Like he just got
what even is the case?
He got scummier. I mean, the idea is like, yeah, you're betting on stuff you weren't supposed to do it. He lied about it a lot. Like all of that was against the rules at the time. And at this point, and like, you know, since then, his like basically his post-retirement thing has been that he will sign anything. He will write anything on anything for $20 or however by $100, whatever inflation has pushed it to. But yeah, at this point, like, what are you going to say that he's like, you can't have like the official league account tweeting out betting lines for games and then say that Pete Rose did something wrong, which is unfortunate because it's like as bad as Pete Rose is to look at in real life, him being cast in bronze and hung on the wall in Cooperstown is going to be like those, like the painting of the nun in the movie, The Nun, like it's going to have a bad effect on the people that see it, but he's earned it.
I think it's time for Pete Rose to enter Cooperstown. And I think the man who should induct him into Cooperstown is the son of the man who banned him from baseball. That's right, folks. I'm talking about actor Paul Giamatti.
Mr. Paul Giamatti. I'm glad you didn't say Chris Pan. I don't think that's not the right setting for him.
All right, everybody. That does it for today's show. I want to thank David Roth of The Defector. Please check out his work there at The Defector. Till next time, everybody. Bye-bye.